I have to ask you about what we saw from Gaza yesterday and overnight. This being the revelation that a convoy of ambulances was hit by an Israeli airstrike. Hamas saying that this was a number of patients from hospital who were killed. Israel saying that, not denying that they struck the ambulances, but saying they did it because they believed there were Hamas inside. What's your reaction?
I think, first of all, I'm shocked at the level of violence now that's happening within Gaza. I've always been of the view consistently over the years that you cannot bomb an urban conurbation as dense as Gaza without killing innocent women and children. And as I said yesterday, and I've been saying consistently, Israel has an obligation to adhere to international humanitarian law.
And where does bombing ambulances fit in that?
It doesn't fit into that. And proportionality and necessity are key principles of international humanitarian law. And in my view, they were not applied in this situation. And I think the World Health Organization have been very strong in articulating the view that ambulances are off limit, hospitals are off limit.
Do you believe the Israeli position?
I mean, again, in war, it's very difficult for journalists, media, and people who are viewing things from afar to be precise judges in terms of what is transpiring in respect of any one incident. But what I'm looking at is the death toll, and particularly the number of children who are dying, and the number of innocent civilians. And the key principle is that the lives of civilians must be protected.
But that's what I find so odd in
at
this,
all times.
where you talk about the thing of the capacity to find truth. Were it that Gaza was saying there was an ambulance struck, or there was a convoy of ambulances struck, and Israel was saying no, there wasn't, you might say, well, how do we get the twain to meet? Whereas when it is agreed, they struck a convoy of ambulances, and we have to believe they knew who was inside one of the vehicles, and that justified civilian killing.
It doesn't justify civilian killing, in my view, and I think I'm very clear in my view that the campaign that is underway is disproportionate, without question, and too many civilians are losing their lives, and Israel has the right to go after Hamas. Of that, there is no question. But it cannot be a collective attack or punishment of.
So, do you share the Taoiseach's view that this is approaching revenge?
And I think there's a rootless pursuit of Hamas, and it seems to, and it's clear to me that there's it's not proportionate, and it is not, in my view, in accordance with international humanitarian law. And there does ultimately have to be accountability here. And I think the International Criminal Court is the body that really can investigate, and has said already that it has jurisdiction in the Middle East. And ultimately, these issues do have to be brought to the fore.
On the topic,
and
then,
people do have to be held to account in terms of any breaches of international humanitarian law.
There's been calls, particularly from Micheál Martin, that the Israeli ambassador's position, which has been a very vocal position, it has to be said, in Ireland in the last number of weeks, the Israeli ambassador's position is untenable. Do you agree?
I don't. I believe fundamentally in diplomacy. I believe that maintaining channels of communication is essential. Maintaining those communication channels does not mean you endorse any particular country's policies. And also, at a time of war and conflict, it's even more important that you maintain diplomatic links. And so we're trying to get 35 Irish citizens out of Gaza. I'm unclear as to how breaking off diplomatic relations, expelling the ambassador, would help us get Irish citizens out of Gaza, because right now and for the last 2 weeks, our officials have been working with Israeli authorities and with Egyptian authorities with a view to getting out Irish citizens. And in the very press release where Sinn Féin said that they want to expel the ambassador, Sinn Féin, the headline is, they want Ireland to use every diplomatic channel at its disposal. And yet in the same press release they're saying, get rid of the ambassador.
Well, if that's
it's incoherent,
then,
and it doesn't make sense. And any serious government, and just make this point, and I have to conduct foreign policy on behalf of the government and the people of Ireland, any serious government knows that diplomacy is the most basic, essential link.
That's what I want to ask about.
Countries.
What the Israelis have revealed in the last while is that they are extremely sensitive, and I don't mean that in a pejorative sense, literally, they are sensitive to international commentary. The Israeli embassy over here and the Israeli diplomats will undoubtedly see the level of popular support that Micheál Martin has and the potential political results she may get at the next election. Do you think, therefore, saying what she has said damages our capacity to deliver diplomacy?
I think ultimately it potentially could, but I think more what's really going on here is politics and the degree to which Sinn Féin will bend and move with only one objective in mind, what is popular, what will improve our electoral base. But it's not serious foreign policy. It's not.
They'll say it's a moral position and that you're a coward.
Position. I mean, they had a different view 10 days ago. They're coming under pressure from the far left, and clearly they're moving in that direction for political reasons. It doesn't make any sense from a hard-nosed sort of foreign policy perspective. We had the same in terms of the Russian ambassador, even though Sinn Féin supported. We're certainly neutral when Crimea was invaded 10 years ago. Sinn Féin had a very odd position in terms of the Russian invasion of Crimea. However, with popular opinion this time, they wanted the Russian ambassador expelled. People want the Iranian ambassador expelled. If you keep going, you won't have much of a diplomatic sort of network before we're finished.
Interesting
I don't
question.
mean that facetious, but it's a very important point, and I think people could do with a basic ground course on a basic course on diplomacy. What do we want as a country? Do we want to be a player? Because in that press release, Sinn Féin wants Ireland to be a player, wants Ireland to be a
Should
serious...
we tone down our language then?
No, but if you want to be a serious interlocutor...
No, but if that's the case, if you look at what the Taoiseach said about Israel, he has accused them effectively of seeking revenge rather than of self-defence. Is that going too far? Does that prevent you being a serious interlocutor?
People have to give their views, and people are entitled to give their views. But when you're saying on the one hand that Ireland has the potential to be an interlocutor, how can you be a serious interlocutor if you tell one side we don't even want to talk to you, we're breaking off relations with you? It makes no sense is what I'm saying.
One further thing on this.
Can be very the easier thing to do is go up on the rooftop, go up on the mountain and just call for everybody to be expelled or whatever, and you feel good about it. But it doesn't really advance the agenda. I mean, I appreciate the fact that Secretary of State Blinken is out there yesterday. He's now today heading to Oman to meet with Arab states.
Doing very little to provide anything other than apparent American support. It has to be said.
No, I think it's more than that, Anton. Much more than that. I mean, what you're seeing publicly is not exactly what's going on privately.
So you think there's American pressure being applied?
That American pressure has been applied to try and get restraint on the Israeli side. And also, critically the talks today with the Jordanians, the Egyptians, the Palestinians that Secretary of State Blinken is involved in. I mean, that is real diplomacy, and he's endeavouring to say, where do we take this? How do we create?
And that's
something?
not supposition on your part.
Anybody who would have any knowledge of how things are conducted know what's going on here. And people are thinking of the day after. People are saying, how do we develop a pathway, a political pathway? What happens to Gaza after this bombardment ends? How do we reconstruct Gaza?
Well, can I ask one question in relation to that? Because it comes in by text.
And it's kind of
indeed,
diplomatic.
But this is a tricky one, I think, for anybody in this situation, be they Israeli, be they a commentator, be they a diplomat. Can the Taoiseach say what would be a proportionate response? If we go back to when this started and Israel finds themselves the victim of one of the worst terror attacks in world history and definitely in their history, what do they do?
Well, I think first of all, it was an appalling attack by Hamas. And I think the point was made to us at the European meeting, if it happened in France, it would be 10,000 citizens would have been killed, the equivalent of. So it's we have to accept the impact of that on the Israeli psyche. But in my view, history teaches us that bombing civilian populations, although you say you're going after the terrorist organization, but the killing of women and children and innocent civilians, in my view, makes the situation worse ultimately. You create more, you radicalize people more, and you make ultimate resolution of the conflict.
But if you have a guerrilla force embedded in a civilian population, what do you do?
I think there are a number of things you can do that could be far more effective. And we witnessed that in Northern Ireland. There was a number of factors that led to the Provisional IRA giving up. And they bombed people innocently as well, and many civilians and so on. But I do think there's a combination of measures, a far more intelligence-driven approach to deal with Hamas. And people know that Israel has strength in that field. But I think the carpet bombing of very densely, this is a very densely populated area, cannot yield anything but a horrific number of civilian casualties and deaths. And that's the problem and the fundamental moral question here in respect of what's going on in Gaza. And that is why Ireland Israel has never liked Ireland's position over the years, because we've been consistently on the side of international humanitarian law. We've called out Israeli violations of the UN Charter in respect of the occupied territories, the West Bank, and even now, the degree of violence in the West Bank by settlers who are now displacing Bedouin farming communities and displacing Palestinians as we speak. How does that advance the peace process or the idea of a two-state solution?